The story of writing, arts, and culture, the story of civilization itself, begins in one place.
Hello everyone! Welcome to our channel. For today's video, we are going to discuss the civilization of the America.
A land bridge links Asia and Americas. During Ice Age, migrants make their way of moving between glaciers along the Pacific coastal plain. The scientists think that Bering Strait between Asia and North America was then dry land, forming a bridge between the two continents. The first human beings who lived in the Americas were probably hunters. By the late 15th century, there are three types of American society have emerged. They were nomadic groups, sedentary or semi-sedentary groups, and groups living in a large population. A variety of languages develops. As migrant hunters found their homes in Americas, they became different from one another. Each group developed its own language and distinctive habits and customs. 100 of different languages they use as communication. American Indians developed distinctive technology. After the glaciers melted and the land bridge from Asia disappeared, the civilization in America were cut off. It helps technology develop. Metals is mainly used for ornaments. They made their tools and weapons from stone, wood, and bone. Hunters become farmers. The climate in North America changed as the glaciers melted. Some areas became hotter and drier. This caused scarcity in food. The hunters learned to cultivate grains and other plants that they found growing wild. That's why they settled in villages and tended their crops. The first farming settlements were located in Mesoamerica. Meso means middle. In the fertile valley of Mexico, people planted growing squash, beans, cotton, and corn. They also do hunting and fishing. The Olmecs laid the foundation for Mesoamerican civilization. In the late 1200 BC, Xiang people in China were farming along the Yellow River. We call them the Olmecs people, who settled on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. The name used to call them means rubber people because the Olmecs were the first people to tap rubber trees for sap. The Olmecs also had a hieroglyphic form of writing, while Egyptian hieroglyphics were deciphered with a Rosetta Stone. A stone is a broken part of a bigger stone slab. It has a message carved into it, written in the three types of writing called scripts. The Olmec writing is unique. They may have been the first civilization in the Western Hemisphere to develop a writing system. There are two forms of Olmec hieroglyphic writing, the pure hieroglyphic and the phonetic hieroglyphics, a combination of syllabic and logographic signs. Yet, no one can read the writing system of the Olmec people. Religious also play a vital role on Olmec people. They also had a ceremonial ball game called Pok-A-Tok. It is the same with basketball, but the players could not touch the rubber ball with their hands. The only that they could use is elbow and hips to hit the ball sent to the small stone ring hanging to a wall.
Play ball! Crush them into the dust. Enjoy. I'm warning you, don't push your luck with this guy.
But Tulio, we're the gods.
Tulio! A hit!
This is impossible. Excuse me.
The Olmecs are artists and architects. Olmec temple pyramids were primarily places of worship. From around 1000 BC, the pyramids built. It was generally built of earth and then faced with stone, typically in a step or layered, shaped topped by a platform or temple structure. It is usually referred to as stepped pyramids. Olmecs also carved enormous stone heads that weighed as much as 18 tons each and stood as high as 14 feet. The Olmecs were extremely artistic people. They carved a giant stone. The carving have large ears, big nose, wide faces, and large lips. This carving portraits of Olmec kings. Similar to the giant stone carvings of the Olmec, late 200 and 900 BCE, they created tenon heads. These heads are curved into walls and tops of interior walls. Olmec influences spreads. By the late 1st century BC, Olmec culture had vanished. Olmec sculptures were broken. The religious centers were swallowed. These caused rediscovered until the 20th century. Yet, archaeologists haven't found much evidence that the Olmecs influenced other peoples. It includes small carvings found in Mesoamerica. Sculptures appear in places of western Mexico and southern Guatemala. Because of Olmec writing and number system, calendar, style of architecture, and ritual ball games, Olmec culture is considered as parent culture. As cities built in the Valley of Mexico, the Olmec religious centers were places of pilgrimage and worship rather than cities. The building of Teotihuacan marked the beginning of a brilliant cultural period that lasted some 700 years. They built amazing dimension, temples, assemble ground, places where people gather for religious purposes. These people known as polytheistic, meaning that they believe in many gods. And they believe that gods intervene in people's life. Gods play an important role in these people. They believe that he provides all the good things and civilization. The name Quetzalcoatl literally means father snake. For the Aztecs, he was considered a god of creation, as he is credited with creating humans. The worship of Quetzalcoatl sometimes included animals sacrifices, and in other tradition, Quetzalcoatl was said to oppose human sacrifice. The Mayas built city-states connected by trade. At about the same time that Teotihuacan was expanding, people known as the Mayas were building religious centers in the Yucatan Peninsula. In Maya society, priests shared control with ambitious rulers who expanded religious centers into city-state. At the head of each city-state was the halak eunuch, meaning the true man. Maya priests play an important role in society. Priests were very important in Maya society, as it was believed that they could communicate directly with the gods. The priests were responsible for leading rituals of worship and sacrifice, and telling the people what the gods want them to do. They would tell the people when to plant crops, who to marry, and what sacrifices they should make. The people did all these things because they believed that the priest was speaking the wishes of the gods. Ordinary people support a rich state. Priests, nobles, and warriors were the upper classes of Maya society. Warriors tend to protect city-states. Maya nobles help run the government. They collected taxes and keep records. Vast resources were needed to keep the Maya upper classes. They didn't pay taxes. The taxes came from the Maya peasants. Each peasant family needs to set aside of corn as a paid-on taxes. Also work on building projects and serve as soldiers. Farm women gather honey, wave goat, and made pottery. Their fine weaving and pottery were much in demand, since nobles used these objects as gifts. Maya women also cared for their household and worked in the fields, but they couldn't go in public offices. In fact, Maya women were not allowed to enter the temples. Maya society declines. Maya society was on respect for tradition. The civilization were apparently changed for about 600 years. Maya centers were abandoned one by one. They didn't move away from one another place, yet their civilization collapsed.
In the 15th century, a new kind of state developed in both Mesoamerica and South America. Chuconques, a small tribe, gained control of great amount of land and wealth. Two major warrior states were formed, one by the Aztec in Mesoamerica and the other the Incans in South America. Aztec probably originated as a nomadic tribe in northern Mexico, arrived in Mesoamerica around the beginning of 13th century. About 1325, the Aztec built village of Tenochtitlan. It will become the capital city and the center of the Aztec Empire. The city was located on Swampy Island in the Lake of Mexico. The Aztec government was similar to a monarchy. The priests and warriors of the Aztec elected the ruler, though some rulers looked controlled by the force. First, these warriors depend on the empire conquered and forced the other to work as their slaves. The ruler had absolute power. He has the head of state, military command, and chief priest. And most crimes punished by death are being sold into slavery. Aztec excel as builders. Aztecs were a highly skilled engineer. Because of their structures, the city became a powerful. The Aztec borrowed many ideas and skills from the other people of Mesoamerica, but they improved on these ideas and made them their own. From the early Mesoamerica, the Aztec adopted the calendar and the writing system. The sandstone calendar shows the face of the Aztec god. It includes 365 days agricultural and 260 days sacred calendar. And the Aztec writing system called pictographs. It is little pictures that convey meaning to the readers. The Aztec social system, their religion, and many of their art and crafts also came from the early culture of Mesoamerica. As the Aztec population grew, so did the demand for water fresh. Aztec engineers built aqueducts which brought fresh water to the city from spring. Because of catastrophic flood in the middle of 1400s decade, almost destroyed the whole city. To address this issue, the Aztec designed a dam that protects the city from the surrounding waters. The Aztec city is one of the best constructed and most marvelous city in that time. The city with street, causeway, market, and aqueducts. By the mid-1400 decades, the city had estimated population about 300,000 greater than that any city in the Europe at that time. As the Aztec population grew, more food was needed. The Aztec found an unusual way to increase the amount of land available for growing food for the people in the city. They create artificial island called chinampas or floating garden. Floating garden is a floating mat made of reed woven together, covered with the soil and planted with the seeds. They were very efficient to agricultural system to grow foods in the city. The floating garden were a tremendous success. In the present time, chinampas is still practiced in certain suburban area in southern valley of Mexico. A trade empire develops. Land of conquered peoples were used to feed the capital city. Their economy based on agriculture and farming. The Aztec demand tribute including foods, clothes, woven blanket, precious stone, fine wood, and slave or captive. And chinampas, which is the agricultural system that used to grow food in the city. The Aztec is polytheism. They worship in many gods. Human beings are sacrificed. As the population grew, the Aztecs sought a new resources of tribute. They particularly wanted more human prisoners, while some captives became slaves. Most were destined to be sacrificed. For the Aztec, the sun is one of the most important aspects of human religion. They apparently believed that the sun stopped shining if they did not make offering. In order to rise, it must be given human hearts. They believed that performing this sacrifice that is give power to the god, which in turn would ensure their survival. To be chosen for sacrifice to the god was considered an honor. They believed that to give your hearts to the god was tremendous honor and guaranteed ticket to a blessed afterlife. The Aztec priests were responsible for making sure that the gods were offered the correct offerings and sacrifices. In one incident, 20,000 captives were sacrificed at the dedication of single temple in the city. That's why sacrificing people in such number caused the Aztecs to be hated by the other people in Mesoamerica. Education is important in Aztec society. The Aztec Empire provided education system to give opportunity to advance socially. Every child was educated no matter his or her social status. Children started their education at home. Girls taught weaving while the boys learned their duties as subject warriors. And boys of lower class from age between 10 to 20 years old, they prefer warfare and techniques to use different weapons. And boys from the noble class prepared to be priest or leader. There both boys and girls could learn how to read, write, interpret the calendar, use medicine, make prophecies, compose poetry, and debate. The Inca Empire built one of the largest empires in the world. They built a small city in the kingdom of Cusco. It was located on the Andes Mountain of South America. Most of the people were farmers who produced their own food and clothes. The ancient farmer used similar farming methods. They create agricultural terraces to grow corn, potatoes, cotton, bean, and squash to feed the most of the Incan population. The Andean at early date also learned to work with metals and to weave textile. The Andean and early date also learned to work with metals and to weave textile. They work with metals such as ceremonial knife, jewelry, and figurines.
Llamas were used to transport animals to carry supplies in the mountain region of Peru. And alpacas were used for their wool and delicious meat in their country. As early as 1000 BC, some villages in the central Andes became religious centers. Several fairly large states developed and conquered their neighbors, but none dominated the area until the 15th century. By 1438, a people called the Incas had come to control a large area around Cusco. They gradually expanded their lands until they ruled an empire that stretched 2,000 miles along the Pacific coast. The empire includes lands that are now part of Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Probably about 6 million people live in the Inca Empire. Inca engineers conquered the mountains. They have been a small tribe that had grown powerful through conquest. They also had Incas, who worshipped the sun. They also learned the techniques of weaving and pattern making. They follow bold geographic design or made patterns of human and animal figure. And one of the favorite design was a cat-like creature. The Inca people dressed in much same way as the pottery flute player. They learned to work with gold and silver, build an excellent system of roads. Inca rule is centralized. The Inca Empire had a stronger political organization than the Aztec state. The Incas ruled directly over the peoples they conquered, forcing them to accept the Inca religion, language, and style of clothing. Every village had a leader who was closely supervised by government officials. These officials enforced royal laws and punished wrongdoers. They used Equipo to get record of population and food supply. Kepa were made of colored cords of various length and were knotted at intervals to indicate different sums. Hundreds of different cultures and languages developed among the Indians who settled in north of Mexico. These different people were a group of geographical regions where people had similar way of living. As early as 1000 BC, archaeologists found distinctive cultures emerged as were influenced by Mesoamerican civilization to the south. The Anazi built cities in cliffs and canyons. By the 1st century, people know as the Anazi. This name was given them by the Navajo Indians, who much later discovered the ruins of their huge, many-stories homes. In the Navajo language, Anazi means strange innocent ones. The Anazi at first lived in dugout houses, roofed with logs. In the late 700 AD, as the population increased, they began to build houses of stone or sand-baked clay called adobe. The Anazi live here for more than 1,000 years. They managed to build glorious cities in the edge of the sea, or what we call cliff. Hundreds of people in the community work together to build huge apartment houses. As the Spaniards arrive, several years later, these huge buildings, pueblos, which means town in Spanish. Many pueblos were built in canyons or high on steep cliffs. One of largest took hundreds of years to build. It had 650 rooms known as Pueblo Bonito. They also had Pueblo, a central room or kiva used for community ceremonies and religious rituals. The Hopewell people carry on widespread trade. A Hopewell people carry on widespread trade. In the 5th or 4th century, an organized farming society developed in the Ohik River Valley. Living in the villages along the rivers, these people became known as mound builders. The mound builders traded widely along the rivers and lakes, acquiring copper from the northern region, seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, and mica from the east. Mound builders' way of living called Hopewell culture. It describes the common aspect of the Native American culture that flourished along rivers in the north, eastern, and western. The Mississippian culture borrows from Mesoamerica. The ideas and goods were exchanged in trade among the Indian people of the America. Mississippian culture prospered from both trade and farming. Some of the work they made were hoe blade and knife made from metal and stone. Wealth is important in the Northwest Coast culture. Along the Pacific Coast, from present-day Northern California to Alaska, a different culture emerged. The people of the Northwest Coast culture area, including the Nootka, Haida, Tlingit, Quaquitayal, and Chinook. The Indian people who live in the north of Mexico were different from Northwest because people did not depend on farming. They live well by fishing in the river and ocean, gathering berries, and hunting wild animals for food. Abundant forest also helped them as it provided cedar wood for making canoes, large houses, ceremonial masks, and curved boxes. The Northwest Coast peoples were also unusual among North American Indians because they greatly valued wealth and possessions. The communities were divided into strict social classes. As they want to show their wealth on others, chiefs and other notable people were held on occasions as a giveaway, and it was called potchas, from the motka meaning giving. The Eskimos create a unique way of life. The Eskimos or Inuit shared in some land and some customs. Eskimos were probably the last migrants from Asia. They created a way of life uniquely adapted to the Arctic environment. The Eskimos hunted whale, fish, seal, and caribou for food. From these animals, they made practically everything they needed. In leisure time, they carved bone and ivory, making maps and picture of their daily life. Indians developed strong communities. Indians throughout North America were generally peaceful and hardworking. Their local villages and tribal groups were organized fairly democratically. There was no king or absolute ruler. Commonly, they respected elder and warriors form a governing council. The council might one person that leads war party or hunting. American Indians north of the Rio Grande. The map shows where the Indian people lived when Europeans reached the Americas. Indian art and architecture. The Indians in north of Mexico were very skilled in many crafts. The Anazi build an apartment houses like Mesa Verde, which protects cliffs. A clay ball made by Pueblo people. It signifies Indians' awareness. The sand mask made by Indian people. They known are skilled woodworkers. Eagle made from Hopewell Indians. Indian peoples had a sense of respect on lands and feeling of harmony with the natural environment. As evidence, let's watch the Tiwa Indian song. The Song of the Sky Loom is a poem, and it explains how the members of the Tiwa tribe are receiving gifts from nature. The nature gives light and water to these people for them to grow their crops. And the lyrics shows the nature is like parents who love and care for their children. Towns and villages from aliens. In large kingdoms, ancient people did not grow in the north of Mexico, but they joined together and sent tribute to the central leaders. But these people can manage themselves independently. In the early 1600s, English settlers arrived. The leaders called Putin, who brought 200 villages together that what is now Virginia. In 1850, a Rookies League was formed. The 5 nations were Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Inieda, and Moke. Where they keep peace. They also choose a man that lead the group, known as solitary pine trees. According to the scientists, how were the Americans first settled? The first settlement in the America began during Ice Age. As the glaciers covered the large area of North America, the migrants crossed the Beringilia land bridge. It was a dry land that Asia and North America connects. How were the people of the Americas cut off from the civilizations in other parts of the world? The Maya centers were abandoned by its people. As the traditions changed little by little, the civilization had been cut off. From where did the early Anazi probably learn their farming techniques? The early Anazi learned farming techniques from the people in Mesoamerica. They were a farmer who are dependent on natural forces. They also do rituals and hoping it will bring good hunting as it provide enough food, rain, and build success crops. What was the purpose of the mounds built by the people of the Hopewell culture? The primary purpose of the monks built their hopeful people culture. They constructed this various style for religious, ceremonial, burial, specifically for honored individuals were buried in months. And most of the common purpose is residential purposes. As the people helped to build this construction, a lot of people may live there. One of the most example is Pueblo Bonito, which occupies 650 rooms. It built for almost 100 of years.
Before we end this video, we lovely meet Pacho
Cecil Grace Palama
from Bachelor of Secondary Education, second-year students, saying, "We can do this para sa bayan at sa kinabukasan." Thank you for watching our video.
Please don't forget to like,
Share,
subscribe,
and click the notification bell for more updates and more upcoming videos.